Greetings everybody, and welcome to my intermediate sharpening video. For those of you who watched my introductory sharpening video, I sharpened a knife that is very simple to sharpen, and I kept the technical discussions pretty simple. That knife had a much straighter edge, so it did not require a lot of angle changing, and it also did not have this chunky bolster down by the heel of the knife getting in the way of sharpening the heel of the knife. So I'm going to try to keep this pretty pithy tonight, but I wanted to expand on some new techniques that come into play when you're sharpening a little bit more difficult type of knife shape. Now this knife is one that will be familiar to many of you. It's an 8-inch chef knife. It probably closely resembles knives that many of you have in your kitchens. Whether your particular knife has a bolster or not, it probably has a curvature of the blade very similar to this, and there are some specific things you can do to make sharpening around the curved belly of the knife simpler and easier. So let's get right to it. I don't want to waste a lot of time. I hope to keep this video under about half an hour. So just concerning setup, nothing fancy here. Excuse me. I have a moist towel on my counter. I have a red brick on top of that, and I have another slightly damp towel on top of that. So that's going to provide me some elevation to work without my hands and knuckles hitting the countertop, and it's going to provide a very stable surface to sharpen on. So, quick review of the grip. Got our middle finger behind the heel, behind the choil here. Our thumb lies down close to the edge of the knife around the heel area to provide guidance and pressure, and then the index finger is up on the spine, and this gives us our angle control. Now, before I start, I'm going to say that once we establish our angle this way, which this knife I'm going to be sharpening at about a 15-degree angle, so here's, let's say 90 degrees, say 45 degrees, half of that, say 22 degrees. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit more. So we're going to be about like that. That's right around 15, 16 degree range, which is appropriate for this style of knife typically. Because of the curvature of the knife, I'm going to be in it. I'm not going to be just going straight back and forth. Okay, there's going to be some curving of the straight back and forth motion, and to follow that, you can watch my index finger and hand, and I think you'll see that, and that is expressly to get around this curve of the blade and make sure that I'm getting even contact and sharpening all around that curve. And then when I get into the straighter section of the blade, as I do each pass, you'll see that I kind of straighten out and it's more back and through. And I'm really going to try to avoid hitting the bolster on the stone, both for the good of the bolster and not scuffing it up, and also for the good of the whetstone. Although I must say that in this case, the whetstone would definitely win that contest. But okay, here we go. So this is a Splash and Go stone. It's a Swahiro 200 grit Deburring MD stone. A very aggressive cutter. This blade is very dull and has a little bit of microchipping in the edge. And so I'm starting with a very coarse stone to make short work of putting a new edge on that. So right at the tip, not a whole lot of curving. But as soon as I get into this belly, now you can really see my right hand curving around. Okay, you see that? So now we're going to get into the straighter section of the blade, and it's going to be a much more straight back and forth kind of motion like this. Now, as far as the angle of the knife to the stone, this would be like 90 degrees going back and forth. This would be, 0 degrees going straight. I find about a 45 or 50 degree angle allows your your guiding hand to sit in a very comfortable position where it's very ergonomic. It also allows more of your knife to contact the stone at the same time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna alternate passes, like 2 passes at a time. Tip the heel, I'm going to switch sides now and do 2 passes on the other side, and the reason for this is I want to sharpen both sides of the knife evenly. I don't want to do so much sharpening on one side and then that I move the edge, the new edge is off center. So I just recently switched my sharpening technique to switching hands. So this sharpening with the left hand dominant is still fairly new to me. And okay. Getting there. There's a little bit of chipping right in front of the heel, so I'm going to do another pass on this side, and then probably 2 more passes per side on this stone before moving on to a less aggressive whetstone. The next one up will be 400 grit, which will be a little more of a typical coarse whetstone that a beginning to intermediate sharpener might have in their arsenal. And I could have started this on the 400, no problem. However, it would just take longer. So, typical to most knives that have bolsters, this one is a little thicker right in front of the heel, right in front of the bolster. They tend to be thicker and more difficult to sharpen. So, okay, got a burr all the way down now. The burr is the raised wire of metal that when you sharpen one side of the knife, it folds when you reach the edge, it folds a wire of metal up over on the other side. So I'm going to do and by the way, be kind to your stones. Another, now getting into the more intermediate level, you can start to think about keeping your knife moving. Whichever section of the knife you're sharpening, you can kind of keep it moving around on different parts of the stone. And this will help to wear your stones more evenly. Okay. Let's see how we're doing here. Pretty good. 1 more pass on this side, 2 more on the other sides, and then we're going to start moving up the stones. Now into the curved section, watch my right hand. Moving the pressure around the different parts of the stone, keep the wear even. Getting into the straight part of the knife now, so it's more straight back and forth now, maintaining the angles. Getting a nice edge all the way down. Okay. Let's see how we're doing on the chips. Pretty much eliminated the chips. Seems to be some pretty soft steel. This knife looks like a high-end German chef knife, but it is actually some American brand, a North American brand, I think, called Members Mark. I don't know. I've never heard of it before. I don't know where it's from. But it's made in Brazil, and they actually do make some good knives in Brazil, so I'm kind of hoping that the steel will be decent, that it will take a decent edge, and all that. Okay, 1 more quick pass on the left side of the knife to even it up, and then we're off to the 400 grit stone, and then we can really start sharpening. Right now, basically what we're doing is getting a big shoulder of steel out of the way, taking some chips out, and just generally getting this whole new bevel up in some clean and fresh steel. Okay, we're done with that. We have moved the burr back and forth down both sides. set that aside. Now my 400 grit stone, this is a generic American stone, but I actually like this. It's not an expensive stone, not a premium stone. This is a soaking stone, so you have to, before you use it, you soak it in water until bubbles stop coming out. And so you get the water permeates the stone. And then, if necessary, you splash a little more on the top. Oftentimes, soaking stones are softer than their splash and go counterparts, and means they can require more flattening, and you have to guard a little more against them dishing out. However, this particular 400 grit is very hard. It cuts nicely, gives a very refined edge for a 400 grit, and holds its shape really well. So I really love this stone for, just doing a, okay, that's moving the burr nicely. Just for really refining the stuff. Whenever I have to go on an ultra coarse stone, like anything coarser than 300 grit, you're really tearing into the steel. And having a kind of an intermediate coarse stone like this, a 400 or 500 grit, really helps refine a lot of the roughage away before you go on your 1,000 grit stone or your intermediate range stone, which could be anything from, say, 800 to 1,500-ish. All right, moving that burr very easily on this. The steel is not terribly hard. It may end up taking a really fine edge, or it may not. We shall see. We put it on a couple of more stones. The chips are out. I don't think you'd be able to see the bevel yet. Okay, so now before moving on to the 1,000 grit stone, I'm going to do a brief deburring process, and that's because I don't now the 1,000 grit stone will easily chew this burr off this thing, but I don't really want that wire metal digging in and slicing and cutting my 1,000 grit stone, because you start getting into the finer whetstones, and especially if they're premium whetstones, they're not necessarily cheap, and you want to preserve them. So for the deburring, I gently drag both right at the sharpening angle. I do a stropping motion on both sides of the knife, very gently with the edge trailing. And the goal here is to just, with very light pressure, and the goal is to just take most of that burr off before moving on to the intermediate and finer stones. And I will repeat that process on the 1,000 grit stone before I move to the final stone, which will be 4,000 grit. So this is a 1,000 grit Swahiro Deburring. This is a magnificent whetstone, which cuts like a beast, but still leaves a nice, very refined polish and edge behind. And it's huge, and I love having so much surface to work with. I work on a lot of large and long knives, especially my Japanese knives, and having these big stones is just great. They're easier to keep flat. These Deburrings wear very slowly. Hear the difference in sound, and as we get on to finer stones, the sound will get commensurately finer. You won't hear quite such a rough, scratchy sound. It'll be a little more of a glidey sound. But you can see the black swarf already building up on this, and that means that we are definitely removing some steel. Silly of me to stop in mid-pass, so I have to pick back up where I stopped. Get the heel section. Now, if you don't switch hands, I really recommend when you switch sides of the knife, if you do your other side like this, keeping the knife the same hand, I really recommend rotating your stones around regularly. You'll still find that you don't hit into this corner and this corner nearly as much as you do the rest of the stone when you don't switch hands. In fact, the reason that I switched to switching hands on double bevel knives was not because I wasn't getting good results the other way, because I was. However, I wanted to even the wear patterns on my stones. So sharpening with this hand, I'm doing a lot of my wear is a lot of kind of a diagonal swath across the stone this way. When I switch to the other hand, I get to wear the other way, and it keeps my stones worn a lot more evenly. Now I'm going to check for the burr. You can hear when the burr is there, you drag your thumb sideways across it, and you'll hear it. This knife has a nice little ping. Okay, need a little more right in the tip. I didn't quite get the tip. I like my tip sharp. I don't know about y'all, but I don't like any dull spots in my blades. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. Still see a little roughness. Excuse me. Right in that belly. So making sure with the curving motion, you can see my right index finger. You can see it curving around. And I only do that for the curved section of the blade. I'm not doing that down the entire length of the blade. Alright, I think that side's pretty good. Let's switch it over. I want to make sure to leave enough time for a good stropping session. Now honestly, with a knife like this, European style knife, made with some kind of high carbon but stainless steel, which is probably not the hardest steel around. It's very often enough to stop your sharpening around 1000 grit, deburr, strop, and you'll have a nice knife. I'm going to go ahead and do one more stone tonight. I'm going to finish on the 4000 just because I love that stone, and I think I don't think it will over polish the edge. I think it will refine it and leave a nice, very nice polished but toothy edge that'll be good for cutting. But I'm pretty happy with how this is sharpening out so far. So I think I'm gonna, let's see, I've got my burr all the way down after just one pass, but I think I'm gonna do, this is really the last stone where we really have a chance to remove enough steel to really make that edge better. So I'm going to do a little more. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up in this video, I should have done a little earlier, the pressure of your guiding hand. I'll show you. I'm going to switch hands here in a second. Do the other side. Just a little bit more right here. When, you know, these fingers, they help guide the knife, but they also supply a little bit of downward pressure on the blade. You don't have to push hard. Let the stone do the work, but you need enough pressure to have a good firm contact to keep the knife from wobbling around and all that good stuff. But what you want to do whenever the edge is trailing, that is when the spine of the knife is moving forward on the stone, you want a little more pressure. So going this way, a little more pressure, and then as you come back, a little less. And this is basically to keep the edge of the knife from cutting into your stone. So it helps with wear on your stones, and it also helps with guard against accidentally rounding your edge over by pushing it hard as it's going into the stone. There are definitely some expert sharpeners out there who are big on edge leading pressure and other things that I do edge trailing. They do edge leading, and they get very, very, very good results. It takes a lot of practice. There's a lot less margin for error. I am not a master sharpener. I'm an avid amateur sharpener who has sharpened a lot of knives since I started, and I've learned a thing or two. And I can get knives pretty darn sharp. Okay, this is feeling quite good. I think again, one more for safety on this side, just to be sure I've gotten everything. before we move on to the finishing stone. You can see in my left hand the arcing motion, maintaining this angle, right, but allowing the knife to kind of do this a little bit, and guiding all that with the fingers of the other hand, which ride just safely up above the edge, close enough to the edge to put pressure on the edge. As the edge trails, a little more pressure this way. I don't really think about pushing down, I just think about pushing the knife forward across the stone. It seems to work pretty well. Okay. That's looking pretty good. So, a little more gentle deburring on the stone, and we'll be off to the 1000 grit. So, we want to make sure now that we don't round the edge over. So, it's better to have, for this deburring, it's better to have the angle a little too low, and maybe not quite get it all, than to have the angle too high and round your edge over. You don't want to round your edge over. So again, just doing this gentle deburring right at the sharpening angle, or maybe a tiny bit below the angle. If you want to micro bevel your edge, then that would be the time to actually raise that a little so that you get a little micro bevel at the edge. But I'm not going to do that today. That's more on the advanced video. I have to figure out what I'm going to do for that. Okay, so moving on to the Swahiro 4000 grit. This is very similar in size and shape to the 1000 grit, and also is a beautiful stone for it cuts pretty fast for a 4000 grit, but polishes like a 5 or 6000 grit. So let's see. You can see the new edge a little bit now. Maybe if I get this to catch the light just right. It's not real wide. Let's see if I can get it. There you go. That's the new edge. There's a little bit of burr left from the last one, catching it a little bit, but that will soon be gone. So let's go on to the 4000 again. Pressure, in this case, pressure going toward the camera with the edge dragging behind. Lightening up, coming away from the camera. On the finishing stone, I really like to lighten the pressure, and I like to just really concentrate on maintaining my angle and just taking my time and really really working my way all down that edge, making sure I get everything. So your fine stones, it will cut a little. I mean, you can see the black building up on the stone. That is a braided metal. That is steel that the stone is taking off. But it happens much more slow. You hear how smooth this one sounds. Running the knife on this stone is like pushing it over wet glass almost. It's a much more refined feeling. Okay. Got a little burr. I think one more pass, and then we'll do a couple passes on the other side, and then we're going to have a more elaborate stropping procedure on the stone. We're going to start stropping on the stone, and then we're going to go to a leather strop, and then we'll cut test and see how I did. Never sharpened one of these before. I don't know the brand at all. The knife looks nice. The fit and finish is actually quite impressive. All the where the metal and the handle material come together, all the various places where their edges in the steel are all nicely polished. The fit and finish of the handle is really comparable to a high-end European knife. Whether the steel is or not, that remains to be seen. It certainly cuts fast. I'm going to guess the steel's on the softer side, but that's just a guess. So, all right. Over here. Again, it's light, fairly light pressure now. We're just polishing, cleaning, refining, not trying to cut a lot of steel off the blade. This is just a finishing. Taking what's already there and just making it as clean and good as we can before we go on the leather strop. Okay, let's do one more pass on this side. Then we're going to start stropping. I'm just hoping to keep this under a half hour, and I think I can just about do that. Notice that as I work my way from tip to heel, I also move my right hand fingers or my left hand fingers on the other side of the knife. I move them along the edge so that I get pressure in different places to make sure that I'm sharpening the entire edge. When I'm not talking to a camera, I can keep moving and I can move my fingers, but it's a limit to how many things I can do at once. And so I usually stop the motion just long enough to reposition my fingers. So now, let me dry this off real quick. You can see we now have a pretty nice little polished edge, nice pretty even bevel all the way down. Okay, so let's begin the deburring. So this is all very light pressure, edge trailing. I don't switch hands for this. Place a knife on the stone, doing this hopefully right at the sharpening angle, and just gently dragging the knife like that. Now when I do this, since I hold the knife in my right hand, I like to bring my right foot back a little bit. And this allows me to keep my body out of the way. It allows me to stay much more still and stable over the stone. And I can do all this with my hands and arms without my body moving around and bobbing around. It makes it much more easy to keep the angle consistent. There are different ways. You'll see if you watch enough sharpeners out there on YouTube or elsewhere, you'll see different techniques for this part of the operation. The important thing is to get that burr off the edge. My method works very well. Other people's methods work pretty well. This is a pretty easy way to start learning how to do it. If you find a better way later on, have at it. Do what works for you. Okay, that's feeling very clean now. I don't feel the edge feels very sharp. It passes the 3-finger test. That is, if you very lightly place 3 fingers on the blade and very carefully feel like you're going to move them sideways, and if your nervous system says nope, then your knife is sharp. That's one way to test for sharpness. It's not the only way, but it's one way. Okay, I'm going to dry this off. I'm going to get rid of the stone. I will clean my stones later. By the way, keep your stones clean. There, I said it. No, you don't absolutely have to, but I mean, it's good for your knives, it's good for your stones, it's good for everything. It's not the end of the world if you have a dirty looking stone though. Okay, let's grab the leather strop. This is a soft leather strop with some green compound applied, and the stropping, you can do it in sections, whatever makes you happy. This is done with light pressure. I prefer to do this slightly below the sharpening angle because the soft leather of the strop will curl up and touch your edge as you brush across it. If you raise your knife too high, you risk rounding the edge over. We don't want to do that. So this is just to get the last remaining little bits of burr off the edge and really polish and clean the micro teeth at the edge. We're not trying to take the teeth away. The teeth help, the teeth cut. Okay. It's like little micro serrations that help your knife bite into the food. Like if you go to cut, tomatoes, green peppers, anything that's waxy, has a hard, slick surface. Those little teeth help to grab it. Hopefully you all can kind of see what I'm doing here. Maybe I'll lift it. Let's see if I get a few where you can really see. Stropping, by the way, can also maintain your edge in between sharpenings. You go to getting ready to do your meal prep, grab your strop, run your knife back and forth across it 10 or 20 times. Like this. Stropping is my favorite part of sharpening. Usually when I get done sharpening, I go out and sit in my comfy desk chair, and I put the strop on my knee, and it's just meditative. It's just easy. It's tactily satisfying. All right, so here we have a knife. I'm going to see if I can get this edge to catch some light for you. You can see it a little bit. I'm not quite sure why. Usually I get this to happen pretty easily, but it's being a little stubborn. Let's go ahead and cut test. Got some catalog paper here, which is fiendishly difficult to slice cleanly. So let's see how I did. Not perfect. Whoops. Well, it helps if I don't drop it. Life's most embarrassing moments caught on camera for the world to see. Okay, let's try that again, and maybe I'll actually hold on to the paper this time. Well, it's not perfect. However, this is actually what I'm doing now. This is actually the hard way through the paper, and it's actually doing that pretty darn well. Oh, no, I started with the hard way. All right, so this is like sort of with the grain. So this is pretty good. That's what happened. I totally forgot this paper is backwards the most. So it cuts pretty good. All right, so that's it. Intermediate level sharpening, expanding on some techniques from the first video, and hope you all enjoyed that. Any questions, let me know. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.